Racist police harass beautiful black woman, handcuffs her. He turns pale and begs when he discovers her identity. The May afternoon in Metropolis is as beautiful as a watercolor painting. The gentle yellow sunlight, no longer as harsh as at noon, penetrates through the lush green canopy of hundreds of years-old oak trees, creating dancing spots of light on the winding cobblestone path in Lincoln Park, the vast green lung and pride of the city. The air is fresh and cool, with the smell of freshly cut grass, moist soil, and the gentle fragrance of wisteria bushes blooming nearby. The chirping of birds on the tree branches, the cheerful laughter of children playing tag on the large lawn, the happy barking of dogs being taken for a walk by their owners, all blend together to create a peaceful, relaxing symphony, a precious spiritual medicine in the midst of the hustle and bustle of urban life. In the midst of this peaceful scene, Dr. Aaliyah Hayes was leisurely strolling, enjoying every precious moment of silence. At 35, she possessed an intellectual, attractive beauty with smooth brown skin, large, deep eyes that shone with intelligence and kindness, and a warm smile that was always on her lips. Her thick black hair was neatly tied up, revealing her high forehead and delicate facial features. She was wearing an elegant gray Lululemon tracksuit, which fit her well and accentuated her fit, healthy figure, the result of maintaining a healthy lifestyle and regular yoga sessions. She had just finished a light jog around the lake in the park and was now taking a leisurely walk, allowing her mind to completely relax after a rather stressful day at work at her private psychology practice. Aaliyah took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill her chest. Lincoln Park was always the place she went to recharge, to temporarily put aside her worries, the complicated stories of her patients, the invisible pressures of a job that required empathy and great patience. She smiled when she saw an elderly couple walking together, a simple but warm image. She thought about her work, about the positive developments of some difficult cases. Then her thoughts turned to her personal plans, a weekend date with her fiancé Marcus, and their wedding planned for next fall at a romantic vineyard in the suburbs. Marcus Thorne, the Metropolis police chief, a strong, upright man but also extremely warm and loving. Thinking of him, a happy smile appeared on Aaliyah's lips again. She continued to walk under the shade of the ancient oak trees, completely immersed in that simple feeling of peace and happiness, unaware that her moment of relaxation was about to be brutally disrupted by people with prejudice and abuse of power. Not far away on the park's narrow paved bike and service path, a Metropolis Police Department patrol car was moving at a snail's pace. Inside, Officer Mike Sullivan, a white man in his late 50s with short gray hair, a hard red face, and cold gray-blue eyes, was complaining about work, the weather, and everything in between to the young officer sitting next to him. He had a perpetual frown on his face, as if the world owed him something. Officer Chris Boyd, about 26 or 27, with blonde hair and a face that was still young but tried to appear worldly, sat in the passenger seat, occasionally laughing along or adding a few bland comments to please his seniors. Boyd had only been in the industry for a few years, still eager to prove himself and learn from the experiences of those who had gone before him like Sullivan, even though those experiences were sometimes tinged with negativity and prejudice. Just then, Sullivan's gaze drifted over and stopped on the figure of Aaliyah Hayes, walking alone on a nearby trail. His scowl suddenly changed, replaced by a sneer of contempt and scrutiny. He nudged Boyd hard on the arm. "Look at that girl, Boyd," Sullivan muttered, his voice thick with distaste. "See the way she walks? Like this park belongs to her. A black girl all dressed up and wearing designer sportswear." He clicked his tongue. "This is a mess these days. She must be in some easy job with good pay, or she's being supported by some guy." Boyd squinted in the direction Sullivan was pointing. "She's pretty, boss," he commented, his tone a little gruff. "But she's a little snobbish. That cocky face." He quickly chimed in on Sullivan's preconceptions, either out of a desire to be accepted or simply because he felt the same way. "What a snob!" Sullivan snapped. "They're usually unpleasant, know a little about words, and then act like they're preaching to others. It's the end of the shift and there's nothing to do. Why don't I just check in on her for fun? Let's see if that noble air will last." The idea of harassing, showing off power, and satisfying prejudice was growing in the old cop's mind, full of dissatisfaction. Boyd, with the immaturity and thoughtlessness of youth, found the idea quite interesting. "Sounds good to me, boss. I'm a little sleepy myself. Let's see how this intellectual beauty reacts." So, without thinking, Sullivan turned the patrol car around and headed straight for the trail where Aaliyah was walking. They decided to stop, not for any legitimate professional reason, but simply out of boredom, bad taste, and the desire to find a vulnerable target on which to exert their twisted power. Dr. Aaliyah Hayes' peaceful moment under the canopy of the ancient oak tree was about to be shattered by an unwelcome storm. The patrol car stopped right next to the trail, just a few feet from Aaliyah. Officer Sullivan and Officer Boyd opened the doors at the same time, trying to project an air of importance and authority. Sullivan, with his beer belly and frown, walked straight toward Aaliyah, hands on hips. Boyd stood back a little, leaning against the side of the car, arms crossed over his chest, his lips curled into a mocking smile. "Hello, beautiful," Sullivan boomed, attracting the attention of several nearby pedestrians. His tone was falsely friendly, but it was laced with inquisitiveness and disrespect. "Walking alone in the park on this beautiful afternoon? Why do you look so pensive?" Aaliyah was taken aback by the officer's abrupt approach and casual tone. She stopped and turned to look at the two of them, keeping a safe distance. "Hello, officers," she replied politely but cautiously. "Yes, the weather is lovely today. Is there anything I can do for you?" She didn't understand why they had stopped her. "Oh, no big deal," Boyd interjected, stepping a little closer, his eyes scanning Aaliyah's gym outfit appraisingly. "Just noticed you look a little unfamiliar, not like the kind of person who works out here. Is this your first time in Lincoln Park?" He was deliberately asking unnecessarily curious questions, as if he were trying to make conversation, but his tone was teasing. "And that outfit looks really cool. It must have cost hundreds of dollars, right?" Aaliyah was starting to feel really uncomfortable. She didn't like the way they were looking at her, didn't like their tone and their nosy questions. "I come to this park quite often," she replied shortly, her voice starting to cool. "And I don't think my clothes are any of your business. If it's nothing important, please excuse me." She turned to walk away. "Hey, wait a minute!" Sullivan quickly stepped forward to block her way, his expression becoming visibly annoyed at Aaliyah's arrogant behavior. "Why do you seem so hasty and annoyed? We're just patrolling, asking a few questions when we see strangers to ensure safety. Or do you not like talking to the police? Are you afraid of being discovered?" He began to change his tone to a suspicious, accusatory one. "I'm not afraid," Aaliyah replied, turning to face Sullivan, her eyes no longer relaxed but serious and sharp. "But I see no reason for you to keep me here and ask me such irrelevant questions. You're wasting my time and harassing me." "Harassment?" Sullivan raised his eyebrows, his voice rising in defiance. "You dare to say that a police officer on duty is harassing you? Don't you know that it's a crime to slander a police officer? Watch your words!" He started to raise his voice, attracting more attention from the people around him. A few curious people stopped at a distance to see what was going on. "I know my rights, officer," Aaliyah said, her voice firm. "And I know when I am being treated unfairly and disrespectfully. Your actions are inappropriate and suggestive of an abuse of power." As a psychologist, she understood the signs of aggression and prejudice. Aaliyah's outspoken, reasoned, and civil rights-conscious protest further infuriated Sullivan. The old cop could not stand being lectured by a young black woman in broad daylight. His wounded pride, coupled with his autocratic nature and pre-existing racial prejudice, made him decide to resort to stronger measures to quell this stubbornness. Inappropriate? Abuse of power? Sullivan sneered viciously. Let me tell you what inappropriate is. We just received a radio report of a suspicious female subject with your physical characteristics, loitering in the park, suspected of drug dealing. He blatantly made up a ridiculous story. So we have every reason to suspect and check you. What? Drugs? Aaliyah was stunned by the blatant accusation. That's ridiculous. You can't make things up like that. Fabrication or not, we will investigate and clarify, Sullivan shouted. But first, to verify your identity and eliminate suspicion, I require you to present your identification immediately, driver's license or ID card. He knew very well that people who went to the gym or took a walk in the park often did not carry adequate identification. This was a calculated trap. As Sullivan had predicted, Aaliyah shook her head. I'm just taking a walk. I don't have my wallet or ID with me here, but I can give you my name and address. No identification? Sullivan interrupted, his voice full of triumph. And not cooperating. That's enough. She's not complying with police orders and she's a suspect. Boyd. He turned to his young colleague, who was waiting for his orders. Put her in handcuffs now, charged with disobeying an officer and obstructing an investigation. Yes, sir, Boyd replied quickly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. He walked quickly forward, pulling the handcuffs from his belt, his expression full of satisfaction and smugness. No, you have no right to do that, Aaliyah protested desperately, trying to back away. This is illegal detention. You will regret this. But her warnings fell on deaf ears. Sullivan stood in front of her, blocking her escape, while Boyd circled around her, quickly grabbing her wrists and twisting them behind her back. Aaliyah tried to struggle slightly out of reflex, but her strength was no match for two large men who were deliberately using force. Clack! The cold metal clicked a second time, dry and cruel, as the handcuffs tightened around Aaliyah's wrists. A sharp pain shot up her arms, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation and anger that gripped her heart. Handcuffed like a criminal, in the middle of a peaceful park, in front of so many strangers. She felt her face burn, tears of anger and humiliation welling up in her eyes. The people around witnessed the scene with different reactions. Some people gaped in amazement, not understanding what was happening. Others whispered and shook their heads in disagreement but did not dare to do anything. Some quickly turned away, afraid of being implicated. Some even took out their phones to film it. The indifference and helplessness of the crowd made Aaliyah feel even more lonely and deeply hurt. See? I told you not to be stubborn. Sullivan stepped closer, looking at the handcuffed Aaliyah with a look of triumph and satisfaction. Now come with us to the station and explain. There's plenty of time for talking there. He sneered, with no intention of taking her there immediately. The humiliation and possibly blackmail were only just beginning in his mind. He had no idea that he had just signed the final sentence that ended his and his young colleague's police career. The fatal mistake under the ancient oak tree had been made. Handcuffed unjustly and humiliated in the middle of a crowded park, Dr. Aaliyah Hayes struggled to contain her rising anger and humiliation. Tears still streamed down her cheeks, but her eyes no longer held fear or confusion. Instead, there was a cold, unwavering determination. She knew that arguing or resisting further at this point was futile and would only make the situation worse. She needed to stay calm, think quickly, and find a way to turn the tables. She could not let these two abusers continue to torture her and get away with it. "Come on! Get in the car!" Officer Sullivan ordered, his voice still full of spite, and he gently pushed Aaliyah's back, forcing her to move toward a nearby patrol car. Officer Boyd grabbed her arm and pulled her roughly. Aaliyah staggered, the stinging pain of her cuffed wrists and the humiliation nearly choking her. But she did not collapse. She held her head high, looking straight ahead. As they passed a group of curious onlookers, she heard whispers. She knew she had to act now, before they took her to a more secluded place to do more evil. She stopped abruptly, turning to face Sullivan and Boyd, taking them both by surprise. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling with emotion but carrying an unusual certainty. "Before you take me anywhere, I think you should know what a terrible mistake you've just made." Sullivan and Boyd looked at each other, then burst out laughing derisively. "A serious mistake?" Sullivan sneered. "The only mistake here is yours for defying the police. What are you trying to do now? Trying to scare us?" "Who the hell do you think you are?" Boyd chimed in, his voice dripping with contempt. "The daughter of some famous judge or lawyer? Or the wife of some gangster?" Aaliyah took a deep breath, looked straight into Sullivan's cold blue-gray eyes, then turned to Boyd's arrogant gaze. Her voice rang out, not too loud but clear and sharp enough for those around to hear. "I am not a judge's daughter or a mobster's wife. My name is Dr. Aaliyah Hayes." She paused, letting her name and title sink in. Then she continued, each word pronounced slowly and clearly, like a verdict being read. "And my fiancé, the man I am marrying this fall, is the man you call Big Boss. He is Metropolis Police Chief Marcus Thorne." Silence. A heavy, almost absolute silence fell over the moment. The bird song and distant laughter seemed to have stopped. All eyes were on Aaliyah, Sullivan, and Boyd. Sheriff Marcus Thorne? Sheriff Thorne's fiancé? Those two words were like a thunderbolt, striking straight into the complacent and prejudiced minds of Sullivan and Boyd. The mocking smiles on their faces froze. The arrogant, smug looks on their faces disappeared in an instant, replaced by shock, extreme disbelief, and then quickly turned into unspeakable horror. What did you say?" Sullivan stuttered, his voice faltering, his originally red face now as white as paper. He stared at Aaliyah, as if he had just seen a ghost. No way." Boyd took a step back reflexively, his eyes wide open, showing utter panic. His hand holding Aaliyah trembled involuntarily. "Chief Thorne? The man the entire police department respected and somewhat feared for his strictness, fairness, and especially his unforgiving attitude towards any wrongdoing by his subordinates. They had just harassed, insulted, and handcuffed his fiancée? In broad daylight? In the middle of the park?" They looked at each other, their eyes filled with fear and despair. They knew they had committed a terrible crime, a mistake that could no longer be undone. The consequences they were about to face would not only be disciplinary action, but also the loss of their jobs or even criminal prosecution. Their entire futures and careers were over. Just then, as if to confirm their horror, the walkie-talkie strapped to Sullivan's shoulder beeped repeatedly, and the operator's urgent, anxious voice rang out. "Car 214! Clear respond! Urgent order from the sheriff's office. Request immediate status and status report. What's going on in Lincoln Park?" Sullivan raised his hand shakily to answer the radio, but his throat felt tight, and he couldn't utter a word. Just then, another police cruiser, siren blaring, drove up to the scene. The door swung open, and Sergeant Isabella Diaz, a stern-looking, professional-looking Latina officer, quickly stepped out. She was the on-duty supervisor for the area and had probably received the call from witnesses or from the dispatcher. When Sergeant Diaz saw the scene before her, Dr. Aaliyah Hayes, whom she had seen several times at department events with Chief Thorne, handcuffed by Officer Boyd, and Officer Sullivan standing there with a blank look on his face, she immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Her face was filled with horror and anger. "Oh my God, Sullivan, Boyd! What the hell are you two doing?" Sergeant Diaz shouted, her voice filled with rage. She rushed toward Boyd. "Get Dr. Hayes out of his handcuffs, now!" Boyd fumbled, his hands and feet shaking, and it took him a moment to undo the handcuffs that were gripping Aaliyah's wrists. He didn't dare look Sergeant Diaz or Aaliyah in the face. "Explain! What is this?" Sergeant Diaz turned to shout at Sullivan, who was still standing there, rooted to the spot. Sullivan stammered, trying to come up with some excuse for suspicion of the subject, failure to present papers. But his words were incoherent, meaningless, and completely unconvincing in front of the obvious truth and the commander's cold gaze. The complacency, arrogance, and thuggery of the two corrupt policemen had all but vanished. What remained was paralyzing fear, belated remorse, and a dark future ahead. They had ruined their own lives with just a few minutes of abuse of power and indulging in their evil prejudices. The mistake under the shade of the ancient oak tree had led to a tragic end. Sergeant Isabella Diaz's timely appearance and firm demeanor quickly brought the chaotic situation in Lincoln Park under control. She immediately separated Officer Sullivan and Officer Boyd, asked them to remain silent and wait for processing, and kindly inquired about Dr. Aaliyah Hayes's condition. "Doctor Hayes, are you okay? I sincerely apologize for the unacceptable behavior of these two officers. On behalf of the Metropolis Police Department, I deeply apologize to you." Sergeant Diaz showed professionalism and a receptive attitude, trying to diffuse the situation and show respect for the chief's fiancé. Aaliyah gently rubbed her wrists, which still bore the red marks of the handcuffs. Her eyes still hurt, but much calmer. "I'm fine, Sergeant Diaz. Thank you for your timely intervention." Her voice was cold. "But I demand that the actions of these two officers be dealt with in the most severe manner. This is not only an insult to me personally, but also an abuse of power and unforgivable discrimination." She made her point clear, with no intention of letting the matter go. "Certainly, Dr. Hayes," Sergeant Diaz assured her. "I assure you that this matter will be investigated and handled according to procedure, without any cover-up." She knew that with something as serious as this, directly involving the sheriff's family, the consequences for Sullivan and Boyd would be severe. And the consequences came sooner than expected. Perhaps Sergeant Diaz had reported the situation directly to his superiors, or the news had reached Sheriff Marcus Thorne through some other channel. Minutes later, Sergeant Diaz received a new directive over the radio, a brief but powerful order, delivered directly from the sheriff's office. She turned back to Sullivan and Boyd, who were still standing with their heads bowed, pale-faced, awaiting the verdict. "Officer Sullivan! Officer Boyd!" Sergeant Diaz's voice rang out, unyielding. "By direct order of Chief Thorne, based on a preliminary report of serious violations of the Code of Conduct, abuse of authority, and serious damage to the reputation of the Metropolis Police Department, you are hereby suspended indefinitely and will face immediate dismissal." She emphasized the phrase, immediate dismissal. "You are required to surrender all department badges, weapons, badges, and other equipment, return immediately to headquarters, report to internal affairs, and do not leave the city until further notice." The almost immediate firing was a devastating blow, a rare and swift punishment that clearly demonstrated Chief Thorne's anger and determination to clean up the force, while also placating the anger of potential victims and public opinion. Sullivan and Boyd were petrified after hearing the decision. Immediate dismissal, without investigation, without a disciplinary committee. They knew that they were truly beyond redemption. All attempts at pleading and explaining were now meaningless. Under the stern gaze of Sergeant Diaz and the witness of the curious people who remained, they reluctantly removed what had once been their pride and symbols of power. The shiny badge, the familiar pistol, everything was taken away. They were now just two unemployed people, facing an uncertain future and the contempt of their colleagues and society. Sergeant Diaz then personally escorted Dr. Aaliyah Hayes safely and formally out of the park. Sheriff Thorne also apparently called Aaliyah directly, his voice filled with worry, anger, but also love, reassuring her and promising to handle the matter to the end. An internal investigation was still underway to finalize the procedure, but the terminations were irreversible. Sullivan and Boyd's actions became a textbook example of the consequences of abuse of power, racism, and unprofessionalism in the police force. The story quickly spread within the department and possibly to the public, though it could have been handled more discreetly to avoid affecting the public image, becoming a costly wake-up call for all other officers. The Lincoln Park incident left Aaliyah Hayes with mixed feelings. She felt relieved that she was safe and that justice had been served quickly for her. But she couldn't help but wonder about the irony of the situation. If she hadn't been the sheriff's fiancé, would the case have been dealt with so quickly and harshly? Would her protests have been heard? Would she have endured further humiliation and injustice? The question lingered in her mind, reminding her of a harsh reality. Inequality and prejudice still exist deeply in society, even in the institutions that are supposed to protect justice. It urged her to do more, not only as a psychologist helping individuals overcome trauma, but also as a responsible citizen, speaking out for systemic change, for a more respectful and equal culture. The mistake under the Oaks incident ended with immediate consequences for the two perpetrators, but it also opened up larger questions, necessary conversations about police reform, about accountability, and about the ongoing fight against the specter of discrimination in every corner of life. Aaliyah knows that the journey is long, but she will not be silent and will continue to work to create that positive change for herself and for her community. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.